Okay, I'm not seeing anybody else logging in. So in the spirit of time and getting to this really exciting and important presentation from some amazing folks, we want to get started. Again, thanks for everybody joining and taking time out of their day for the WMBA's Black Homeownership Initiative webinar. My name is Jim DeMarco. I'm the current president for the Mortgage Bankers Association. And along with the rest of the executive team, including Lisa Goldsmith, our past president, Tony Fernandez, our treasurer, John Smits, our VP, and Janine Spriggs, our secretary, and of course, Tanya Wortham, our programs chair. We want to welcome you all today. I don't want to take up too much time because we have a great moderator and Tanya to do some introductions, but I just wanted to thank everybody for making their time available for us. And we appreciate all of your support for the Mortgage Bankers Association. And without further ado, I'll pass it off to Tanya, and thanks again, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our February event. We sure appreciate you being here. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. We do have a larger panel. They have a lot of really important information to share with you. So if you could put your questions in the chat box as we go through the presentation, we will be sure to address those at the end. And also we will be recording this, so you will be receiving a recording of this so that you can review it. If there's any questions, you can reach out to me or anyone on the WMBA. With that, I'd like to introduce, I have to put my glasses on, our moderator today is Cy Richardson. And Cy Richardson is Senior Vice President for Programs at the National Urban League and a member of the League's executive leadership team. Cy is a recognized and respected expert on housing and community development, job creation, and racial wealth equity, and is a sought-after thought leader on issues related to building a more inclusive economy. Central to his work in the promotion of asset building and intergenerational wealth creation opportunities for people of color in urban America. In his current role, he leads the League's program design, implementation, and evaluation activities, supporting national efforts to create economic and social opportunities, ensure that prosperity is widely shared regardless of race, gender, ethnicity, or geography. As a grants officer, he has supported efforts to increase economic security and mobility for low-income families, close the racial wealth gap, and advance financial inclusion. I am so pleased to introduce Cy Richardson as our moderator today. Thank you, Cy, for coming all the way from New York.
Thanks very much, Tanya. I appreciate it. And I would have taken that flight gladly out to Seattle. It's a wonderful city, wonderful part of the country. Hope to see you all in person soon. I really appreciate being invited to participate in today's conversation. And I think the Black Homeownership Challenge is one that's a national one. I mean, I think the Black homeownership rate has plummeted to levels not seen since segregation in housing was legal. Even more disturbing is the fact that in the decades since the end of the Great Recession, it has continued to fall, while every other demographic group has seen significant recovery. Now, the reasons for this crisis are well documented and include systemic racism, equity stripping, and a significant loss of affordable housing stock and mortgages. But it's also compounded by multiple generations of explicit discrimination under federal law that's also had a direct impact in suppressing homeownership rates for people of color, as well as the unique factors that first-generation homebuyers face. So this is the framing for, what are some of the kind of solutions, recommendations, best practices, approaches that can be understood, discussed, and scaffolded and taken to scale. So again, the conversation will be around solutions and how we can attack, address, and respond to Black homeownership in Washington and the broader region. We have wonderful speakers today, and I'd like to just introduce them if I could. First, speaking today will be John Drumgoole. John is the Vice President of Community Lending of the Strategic Growth Team with New American Dream. John is currently serving in a career capacity to support emerging and mature markets. John uses his skill set to help grow market share, working with company executives and leaders across multiple channels. He has at least 10 years of combined leadership experience in sales, business development, and financial services. Additionally, John has over 10 years of public speaking and presentation experience as well. Over the course of his career, John has successfully placed over $1 billion in market volume through strategic growth efforts. John is completing his Master of Business Administration degree from Drexel University's LeBeau College of Business. He's active in several trade associations, including the Mortgage Bankers Association here. He's an avid runner, foodie, loves travel, music, lifelong learning, connecting with awesome people, as we all are, giving back to the community, as he's doing here, and spending time with family. Welcome, John. Please, what can you share with us today? I know you have a presentation.
Thank you so much, Ty. I really appreciate that. Good evening, audience, and thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I am honored and pleased to be on a panel with such esteemed colleagues such as Cy, Patience, and Marty. Thank you so much. Folks, you know, when I begin these conversations, I really like to begin these conversations by talking about the why. Why is it so important that we do what we do? And when I think about the why, it brings me to an economic term that we use very much. And that economic term is the term externality. And what an externality is, folks, and some of you are already aware of this, is pretty much a third-party spillover effect that affects third parties either positively or negatively. And when I think about minority lending, when I think about closing the wealth gap, that positive externality is something that falls into the realm of being able to pass over generational wealth from generation to generation to generation. Unfortunately, my father left us 2 years ago. He was a great friend. I loved him like a brother. And in the process, he left me land that was passed on from my great-grandparents to my grandparents, over to him, and subsequently over to me. I remember as a young kid, him walking me down this trail. And at the end of the trail, we would stop and I would look out and there were acres upon acres upon acres of land. And me as a young kid, I just thought this was another room for me to play in, another backyard for me to play in. But as I got older over the course of time, one thing I realized was what he was showing me was, son, this is yours. This is ours. I mean, if we could begin to pivot right now, we're not going to be able to throw a Hail Mary and, you know, tackle all of the close of the wealth gap right away. But if we can start right now and begin to pass on generational wealth to each generation, we can begin to close that wealth gap. Some of our other ethnicities and other counterparts, some of the reasons why they've been so fortunate to get ahead is because they had that advantage. But I believe we can start to create that advantage for the Black and African-American community going forward, and we'll see an exponential effect. Another positive externality is a spillover to this great resource we have in home buying. The National Association of Realtors did a research survey. They did some quantitative data. In my city alone, Washington, D.C., the state of Maryland, they found that each home sale generated at least $250,000 in income for the local economy. That right there, folks, is a reason for you to buy into this. Look at the things that it could do for our schools, for our teachers, for our communities. Those factors alone create a level of buy-in that some days when you're thinking about, wow, this work is hard, it's tough, that why can keep you pressing on. Let's go to the next slide, please. I absolutely love this quote by Jim Rohn. It says, when the stronger the why, the easier the how becomes. And you may have had one of your toughest weeks in the industry. Some people have had their toughest day today, was one of their worst in their careers. But when you think about this and when you think about your why, sometimes days like that hit me. And when I think about how strong my why is, it illustrates all the solutions and they'll begin to pop right in front of me. So it's very important to tackle your why, because what we're doing is heavy lifting. It's going to take an ecosystem for all of us to complete this task. Next slide, please. Real quick, I want to focus in on some of the economic data that our good friends at the MBA have given us. And right now, our MBA, they have their servicing conference going on in Orlando. Special shout out to our good friends out there in Orlando enjoying that. But Bob and his team are doing a great job. I love their economists. For the sake of time, I'll focus in on the 2022 purchase money market data. And you can look at the 4 columns. I'm sorry, these numbers are so small, but you can see over the 4 quarters of this year, they are projecting, folks, that we should have a potential market share of $1.73 trillion in available purchase money business. How awesome is that? If you're on the strategic leadership board of your companies, you can begin to develop strategies right away to say, how can we get our share of this pie? 1.7 trillion in available market share. Let's move to the next slide, please. Here, I want to dial it in and focus on some opportunities for the African-American community, specifically in some of the largest cities with some of the largest populations of Black folks. Thankfully, our friends over at NARAB, Madam Lydia Pope, they're doing a great job over there, provided us this data. I want to zone in real quick and let's look at Detroit. 50%, the share of all applications, 50% are from Black applicants. Folks, if you don't have a team in place and are looking to do things in cities like this, you're missing out on some tremendous opportunity. Let's look at Baltimore. 39%, folks, a share of all applications are from Black applicants in Baltimore. Excellent resource for you to go in and do some more community lending in areas like this. Look at Memphis, Tennessee. 35% of the share of all applications coming out of Memphis, Tennessee are to African Americans. Huge area, even Philadelphia, 21%. So when you look at areas like that, 1 out of every 2, 1 out of every 3, 1 out of every 4, those are huge opportunities for us to dig in, get boots on the ground and be active in our communities. Let's move to the next slide, please. So here's a slide that I just want to do a little math to showcase what I call the good stuff, things that we can look forward to as we're charting ahead. So this first column here, the first line, the 4.9 million, that represents 2020 HMDA data. That was all purchase money transactions that were done in 2020. The 326,000 were the purchase money transactions for African Americans. That equates to 6.7% of all purchase money loans went to African American borrowers in 2020. So the next line, what I did was I leveraged the 1.73 that was forecast from our economist friends at the MBA. And we used the 6.7% as an anchor. Normally, when I do calculations like this, I like to average in 2 years together. But unfortunately, since we don't have the 2021 HMDA data, I have to anchor using 2020 data. But we can hold to the 6.7 anchor, and we come up with a potential market share of lending to Black and African American folks, a potential share of $115 billion north of that. That's huge. That is a bona fide business line that you can tell your corporate leaders, okay, we need to get some marketing dollars out there. Look at how much business, if you were running a company and that's all you were lending to were Black and African-American borrowers, you could build a company off that. And that's a lot of volume there. So let's move to our next slide. 115 billion is our magic number there. We just fast forward just a little bit quicker. If we can go back to our next slide. Our former slide, please. 115 is the magic number there. 329,000 is the median purchase price. So we come up with the number there of 352. So folks, at the end of the day, that's a potential increase of 7.8% of lending that could happen in the African-American community. That's huge. That is a game changer. That gets me pumped. When I see numbers like that, it gets me pumped. It says, hey, let's charge forward and let's make this happen. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. So here's our commitment for New American Dream, New American Funding, our community commitment. 2021 alone, folks, 2020 alone, 12.4% of New American Funding's volume in 2020 went to African-American borrowers. Compared, there's that magic number again, 6.7% for the industry. That's 85% more than the industry average. So when you see us at conferences, walking around with t-shirts, we're a leader in lending to minorities, you know, that's our shining star there. Of course, there are companies out there that are probably doing more total loans than us, but 12.4% is our batting average. That's 85% more than the industry average. This year, we want to increase that lending percentage to 15%. So here's my challenge out there to all of my colleagues in the IMB space, especially if you're a company out there and over the last 2 years, you're lending to African Americans, Black borrowers was only 5%. I challenge you, let's shoot to increase that to 7% this year. Where you may say our lending to Black borrowers was only 6% over the last 2 years. My challenge to you, let's try to get 8.5%. Let's come together collectively because it's going to take industry-wide, as far as all lenders, it's going to take all of us pooling together and making this happen. Next slide, please. So over the next 7 years, New American Funding, along with our executive team, we're committing $20 billion along with our New American Dream Initiative to Black borrowers over the next 7 years. We're super excited about this, folks. We have the resources to put in play to make this happen. So over the next 7 years, join us, partner with us. Let's make this $20 billion commitment a reality. Let's go to the next slide, please. Let's talk about something about obstacles and barriers. And my colleagues, they're going to do a fantastic job. Patience, they're going to really run the ball in the end zone. When we talk about stuff like this, that's where their expertise is. But, you know, I'm doing some research data for one of my academic professors about some of the disparities in minority lending. And this is the framework that will arguably probably turn into my thesis at the end of the day. But one thing that I pointed out in this research that I did for him, I showed him that, you know, Freddie Mac did a quantitative survey where they found that 3 million Black Americans were mortgage ready right away. But you look at the total number of Black applications who got a loan in 2020, that number was just north of 300,000. So folks, just do the math. That's 90% of demand that's still out there. But yet every year we tend to see these numbers flat every year. And historically, folks, I don't think we've ever cracked the 50% threshold. I think the highest we've gotten was 49. You know, Cy could probably, you know, give you that direct data. So my thing is, if we could just crack that 50% threshold for the first time, I believe the dominoes will begin to fall from there and we'll be able to spring forward. So let's move forward to some of the challenges that we've been seeing. And the next slide here shows you data from the CFPB, and it just lists a few highlights of some of the barriers to Black and African-American homeowners versus debt to income ratio. That's a huge one. Credit history. You know, we have a colleague, Anthony Holt, and his team right there with the New American Dream. While we're doing our presentation, they're doing a credit seminar about how to increase your credit score, you know, what plays into it. So we're super excited about that. Collateral. Last year, along with our partnership with Freddie Mac, Dr. Andre Perry came in and did a great presentation about collateral, appraisal bias. We hear so many stories about people standing in for them to increase the value of their home. That's huge. Insufficient cash. Down payment, you know, we have tons of down payment assistance program. I know Cy and Patience can, you know, add more color to this, but that's a huge one. Credit application incomplete. You know, this is where we fall in line as a lender. Putting a qualified mortgage banker in front of an applicant can really probably solve that problem. We can drive that number down to single digits just there. So let's move forward to our next slide, please. This is something that's near and dear to my heart, folks, because it talks about something that's happening like right in our own backyards. I want you to focus in on 2010 numbers. The median home sales price, and this quantitative data was given to us by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, was only $222,900 in 2010. But look at what happened over the last 10 years. Look at where it is in 2020, $329,000. Folks, that's a 48% increase. Now you can drop this, your thoughts in the chat feature here, but I want you to just think off the top of your head, what's one thing that did not increase by 48% over the last 10 years? One thing that comes top of mind for me is people's income. Their wages did not increase 48%. So now, folks, we have an affordability issue here, and Patience and Cy can probably do more justice to this and paint some more color here. But over the last 10 years, we can see, and I don't think this number is going to stop. So it's going to be great for us to partner not only with, you know, nonprofits, but other people inside of our whole ecosystem. Maybe some people work 9 to 5. Maybe we can teach them how to build an LLC on the side, things like that, to begin to raise their income. Because I don't think we're ever going to go back to 2000 numbers where average home price is 165. So we're going to have to collectively come together, and it builds people income, help them build, you know, their disposable income, help them save, help them gather ways to meet these rising home demands. Let's move to the next slide, please. Here's a great book recommendation, and I absolutely love Ryan, not because he's a former alum of NC State like myself, but I think he's just a brilliant economist who brings real world thoughts into his economic models and real world practicality. And in this book, The Gated City, and I'll just kind of paraphrase this in particular, what this book was alluding to was cities that had these proverbial gates built up. Now, these gates weren't built out of steel. They weren't built out of bricks. What they were the proverbial gates of home affordability. One neighborhood, minimal price to buy in, $800,000. Another neighborhood, minimal price to buy in, $1 million. Another neighborhood, minimal price to buy in, 1.5. And what that was doing, folks, was building a proverbial gate for people to get in. So people can't access this, so they're getting pushed further and further out. So the price and the barriers for them to get in was almost impossible. Pick it up on Amazon. It's a very short read, The Gated City. It'll bring so much enlightenment to you from this perspective of home affordability. Next slide, please. So real quickly, as I round this out, I want to talk about some strategies and solutions as it relates to New American Funding, New American Dream, some of the things we're doing. I call this the winner's circle. I'm super excited about this. Let's move to the next slide, please. First of all, I want to talk about the K-shaped strategy, something that I kind of reverse engineered. As you've seen throughout the pandemic, when crisis and times of crisis happen, people tend to say, economists tend to use this term K-shaped recovery, meaning one side is going to recover a little bit quicker than the other. So I thought to myself, wow, instead of having a K-shaped recovery, why not having a K-shaped strategy to build around and kind of reverse around this thing? And in the Black community, folks, we have our LMI sector, and then we have our affluent sector. If we're going to hit that $115 billion in market share, that's not going to be just solely on LMI and low to moderate borrowers alone. That's going to be some people that have no problem putting 3% down. That's some people in there that have no problem putting 5% down, 10% down, or even the mid 20% down. There are people out there that can do that. And I believe as a community, if we can move forward and begin to develop a dual strategy where we serve our affluent borrowers and our underserved borrowers and lift our communities together, that is really going to help us. Because if you're an originator out there and you have your pipeline full of nothing but hard loans, a lot of bond loans, that's going to lead to a lot of burnout. So I challenge you to mix up your business. Let's go after both sectors. Let's lift our communities together, and you'll begin to see more of a tentpole strategy come up where you can start giving out of your overflow, and that will help you lift your communities even better. Let's move to our next slide, please. So here I want to point out 10 of the wealthiest Black communities in the country. 3 out of those top 10 are in California, of course. So View Park, Baldwin Hills, Ladera Heights. I have some great friends from Ladera Heights. I want to point out something that really stands out to me. 5 out of the top 10 wealthiest Black communities are right in my backyard, folks, in the state of Maryland. That's huge. If you're a loan officer or a team out there in the state of Maryland, you definitely want to use this K-shaped strategy. Reach out and build your book of business that fashion. I promise you, your job will be much easier, and you're going to find out that you're going to be able to serve even more people who are in that undeserved space. And then you have your 2 in New York. Actually, number 10 is actually Uniondale. Cy, you're probably familiar with these communities. If you're on the West Coast, folks, that's in Long Island. If you want to visit a beautiful place about an hour and maybe so up the road, you have the Hamptons there, beautiful place. I vacation there. I love it. Come visit. These are beautiful communities, folks. So we can see that there is a rich bona fide business line within the Black community. Sometimes when you mention this, community lending to Blacks, people always look at it and sometimes they always think of it as a burden. But I'm going to tell you that there is a lot of wealth, there's a lot of influence, there's a lot of good things going on. I heard one specific say there's $1.6 trillion in buying power in the African-American community now. Folks, this is a bona fide business line. Get your VPs, get your executives in line. Let's develop some strategies and let's win together. Next slide, please. Here's where I come into play. This is one thing that's near and dear to my heart. I'm a strategic growth guy. I'm a strategy guy. And one thing you'll hear our leaders talk about, and one thing that I want to point out, folks, that none of this works unless you have buy-in from the top. That's why I love our leaders at our company, New American Funding, Rick and Patty Arviello. They've given us this buy-in from the top. How they built our diversity arm, how they built our thing is representation, folks, mirroring the communities that we serve. The number one way, I would say 80% of things that will solve a lot of our challenges is putting boots on the ground in these communities and have people that look like them. They like to do business with them. They trust them. They're going to be able to navigate a lot of the nuances. They're going to be able to get those hard elbow grease type loans done. They're going to be able to overcome a lot of these hurdles for you. We just launched a brand new team in the Mid-Atlantic, a millennial. A good portion of our workforce is made up of millennials. Also millennial by the name of Raheem Oliver just launched a team out there. You have Kim Arrington in Georgia doing some amazing things out there. We have Dwayne Graham in Texas building this out. Our practitioners, folks, are our number one asset. So if you could just mirror the communities that you serve, and my challenge out there to all of my colleagues in the IMB and the depository space, if you don't have branches, boots on the ground in these communities, that's my number one challenge. Open up a branch in these communities. You'll see that the difference will start to begin and the ripple effect will begin to happen. Next slide, please. And as I close this out, I want to talk about home buying education, which I think is key. There's our colleague Ilya Blakely out there doing a home buying education seminar in the Great Lakes. This year, part of our strategy to win New American Funding, New American Dream, is we have dedicated 4 major national events to home buying education, and we're going to be partnering with some very large companies like Urban League, other companies, Home Free USA, and we're going to be doing home buyer education workshops all over the country in 4 quadrants this year. So we're super excited about that. We believe that we want to educate people at the front, in the middle, and at the end. So not only when they get in the home, we want them to stay in the home. Next slide, please. And as I close this out, one of the great things about this is our partnerships. We can't do it. Here's a picture of myself. There's a representative from the National Association of Realtors. There's an executive from Housing Finance, Charles Lowry, who is our Director of Legislative Affairs. I had the pleasure of having dinner with Charles in Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago, along with some other executives. They flew in. Folks, we were sharing ideas about our recent alignment with our CDFI, which, a lot of proprietary stuff happening. We're going to be able to align and do some amazing things with underserved communities with our CDFI bank. So if you're not a partner of New American Funding, you want to partner with us this year, because we're going places, and we have other partnerships. We're budding, developing more. Home Free USA, NAMBA, NARAB, National Association of Realtors. We even have some in-house things going. We're expanding our Chinoa offering. An awesome guy by the name of Mark Tribuna is working with Kim Arrington. We're going to be partnering with more nonprofits to drive more production out of that space. So our partnerships are going to be key to win. Next slide, please. So here's what makes it all work. Our people. You got to have good people, folks. Boots on the ground. There's a great picture that all of us took at NAMBA conference last year. We're a leader in lending to minorities. We have a $60 billion servicing portfolio. We have branches all across the country, north of 150 branches. And our leadership folks, reach out to us. Please partner with us this year. We love to have your support. And this year, my challenge to everyone in the whole ecosystem, every task force, let's move from congruence to synergy this year. If we can do that, we can have success. Thank you so much. And I'll pass the baton over to my colleagues and let them take it in the end zone from here.
Hey, John, I really appreciate that, John. That was great. You had me at hello, as they say, and you had me eating out of the palm of your hand for the first 15 minutes until you said that you went to NC State. And as a Carolina grad, then I didn't hear anything you said for the last 15. I just saw red. But no, great stuff. Great stuff. Great stuff. And I want to just focus on one thing as we move into Marty and into patients. Look at that Freddie Mac piece you mentioned. Pre-pandemic, 1.7 million Black households who made $100,000 a year. Pre-pandemic. Now, how do we kind of get those folks along, move them towards home ownership? There's a lot of good messaging you had in there, but I think we have to double down on some of those techniques and solutions you mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to now move to our next 2 speakers quickly. If you just indulge me, if I can just go over their bios quickly, if I might. Patience Malaba is the Director of Governmental Relations and Policy at the Housing Development Consortium of Seattle-King County, where she leads the Association of Diverse Organizations in a shared effort to increase access to affordable housing, developing and managing the annual advocacy agenda. A commitment to environmental and economic justice and her passion for an equitable society led her directly to the affordable housing sector. A committed network leader, Patience worked with multi-sector partners that range from financial institutions, developers, and community partners to launch the Black Homeownership Initiative 7-point plan to advance their commitment to equity and facilitate wealth building in communities where inequities are persistently stark. She also serves on the Washington State Department of Commerce Home Ownership Disparities Work Group, charged to develop recommendations that can effectively address the homeownership gap in the state. With her is Marty Kooistra. He's the 3C project manager for a core team of community leaders focused on increasing the intergenerational wealth of Black households through home ownership. This initiative is one of 6 sites supported by the Center for Community Investment and will be implementing the Black Homeowner 7-point plan. Marty's a champion of coalition-based work at the intersection of community development, equity, and affordable housing. An avid practitioner of network leadership, his efforts have advanced home buyer financial readiness, subsidy and financial sustainability policies, the rehabilitation and preservation of foreclosed and distressed properties, and the design and development of affordable, high-performance housing. He was honored to serve as executive director and board president of the Housing Development Consortium of Seattle-King County. Wow. My kind of people here. I open the floor now, that's for the presentation, to Patience and Marty. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Sai, for that introduction. And John, thank you for the amazing presentation. Really enjoyed every detail, and thank you for grounding us in the why. I agree that the stronger the why, the easier the work. So thank you so much for that. I want to begin by grounding us in some realities that John touched on, and more so bring the realities home here in the Puget Sound region. In January of 2022, Zillow released a research report that states that Black mortgage applicants are denied 84% more often than their fellow white applicants. And this is data from 2020. And I pause there so it really sinks in. It's 84% more often than their fellow white applicants. And this is up from 74% in 2019, going up by 10% to this point. And we continue to see these numbers being repeated. Nationwide, it's about 19.8% of Black applicants were denied a mortgage in 2020. And that's the highest amongst races. When you look at the white population, there was 10% denial compared to the almost 20% for Black households. And one of the reasons that is really cited more predominantly in denial of mortgages is, of course, the credit history, to John's point earlier. And as such, amongst other factors, Black homeownership remains at a very low rate. We have not gotten back to the peak that we ever got to, which was the 2004, when we got to 49% nationwide. And now we still remain at that 44%, which of course there's been some relative gains, but not much, given where we are with the COVID-19 pandemic and the expectation that we will continue to plummet. So the reality of these numbers has been the reason why we came together here in the Puget Sound region to recognize that this really reflects a larger part of the community story. There's so many people, in particular Black households, who just don't have access to intergenerational wealth building opportunities. And we convened in March of 2021 as collaborative partners of a network to really look at a way that we can, as collective stakeholders, explore the creation of a challenge statement, get us to a place where we can have a focused, specific initiative that can approach this work from that network perspective, but really answer the questions of how do we address this racial gap that has been consistent. And I will just give you an overview of the challenge statement before going into the details later on. But together we agreed to aspire for a time when the home ownership rates for BIPOC communities can get to a place where they are equal to their white peers. And we intentionally set to uphold a targeted universalism approach, with our immediate focus being on increasing and sustaining Black home ownership specifically. And that is to answer the question of how do we scale the number of Black homeowners across the Puget Sound region. So before going into the details of the initiative and the 7-point plan that I will touch on later on, I would like to invite Marty Kooistra, who has been a leader, co-conspirator, and champion in making this initiative possible, for him to unpack the framework of how we intend to implement this work at this point, and then speak a little bit into how we have broken down what's in the 7-point plan into something that can be actionable. And after that, I'll come back to walk you through the 7-point plan and the strategies and the process that got us there. So Marty, if you will take it away from here.
Just give me just one indulgence, please, Patience. Marty, if you before you do, I would just like to just put a question out based upon what John and Patience has introduced for folks to just consider as Marty speaks, and they can maybe just comment in the chat room. That might be kind of fertile material for us at the end of Marty's presentation. I just wanted folks to reflect on what I mentioned earlier, that pre-pandemic, there were 1.7 million mortgage-ready Black millennials who made $100,000 more annually, according to Freddie Mac. At least 3 million Black households were identified as mortgage ready, and more than 2 million were able to meet income requirements, but didn't have enough credit history to meet traditional requirements for home loans. So why is this? And I think without detailed answers to these fundamental questions, many of the strategies, many of the 7-point plan pieces, which I think are incredibly well thought out, will be undercut by a lack of interest. Getting back to John's point about marketing. Just want to put that out there, that tension, if anyone can reflect on that and throw questions or comments in the chat. Thanks, Marty. Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Cy, and thank you, Patience, and good to be with you and to see some old friends in the list of participants today. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is my simple way of trying to figure out what Cy was just talking about in some respects and applying it to this market. You might recognize this as a McKinsey issue tree. The big question, the hypothesis, how do we scale, right? The number of Black homeowners. And the brown section really is, in my mind, the supply issue. And in a market like Seattle or other West Coast or hot markets around the country, trying to solve this from a demand side only doesn't make sense because there is just not enough affordable product to purchase. Now, of course, that changes to John's point when we look at different income spectrums. And a lot of the effort we're talking about here is hitting that LMI income target. But what do we need to do to increase supply, and where do we get the land, the funding, and diversify the production and capability to make that happen? How do we take groups like Habitat for Humanity, the Land Trust movement, all of those efforts, and multiply and scale their capacity, partner joint ventures, et cetera? The blue, in my mind, is the demand side. And to Cy's point, how do we better understand how we move people who may have at some point in their lives been bopped on the head and said, no, we're giving you adverse action. We're denying you that credit application. How do we take folks and walk them through a process? Homeownership is a journey. It's not an event, right? And the marketing and outreach piece is critical. How do we get community-based outreach to happen? How do we find the right places and spaces in which to do that, and then allow people to get on that journey? So we're not talking about never, but maybe not now. And we're doing that underwriting decision to Patience's point. I believe this from my 24 years of Habitat for Humanity work. We're underwriting too many people right off the street and denying them and sending them into that space of, it's not for me. And we have to change that and work on the debt remediation, credit remediation, all other aspects of that journey before we actually fill out that application. So we're moving that denial rate down at a much more significant rate. The green, folks, to me is what John talked about, the ecosystem. We need to get congruence and alignment in the ecosystem. We have to encourage and incentivize people to collaborate, break down walls, and really bust through things. Next slide, please. So I'm going to let Patience jump in on this data and take it from here, but I just want to say one
Thank
thing.
you, Marty.
Yeah. I'm just going to announce, Patience, that we're going to do this kickoff on the 1st for the 3C initiative in Seattle. We can say more about that later, but it will operationalize this plan that Patience is going to share with you.
So the plan that Marty references is a 7-point plan, which Cy, I'm pretty sure with your work on the Black Homeownership Collaborative, you're very familiar with this concept. We're really learning from the national partners who have been doing this work and replicating that at a local level and trying to develop a program similar to what you have in the 3x30 program that has been worked on at the national level. And the 7-point plan began with grounding on the reality of the data, because we believe that data is irrefutable. We can't massage it in any other direction. It shows us the reality. And when you look at the numbers in the screen, you will see that in the Puget Sound region, most Black households are actually renters. And therefore, they are the majority of the people who are rent burdened and exposed to the affordable housing shortage, as John was emphasizing, the affordability crisis that we continue to have. In addition to that, you will see in the next slide, please, that there's also a wide and persistent gap in terms of wealth between white and Black families. In fact, the gap, if you are looking here in terms of the numbers, from 1992, it grew back from 100,000 to 154,000 in 2016. This number has gone up at this point to 186,000 in 2020. We just haven't had time to have a graphic that can reference that and show you that clarity. And that's mainly it because the white families gained significantly more wealth than what was gained in Black households. As such, based on this data, we came together to craft this comprehensive strategy of a joint public-private partnership. And if you go to the next slide, I will give you a sense of some of the partners who were at the table working with us as the Housing Development Consortium, working alongside the Washington Homeownership Resource Center, the WMBA, as well as the Housing Finance Commission, to really get us to a place where we had grounded clarity on what our challenge statement was. And you'll see in the next slide, the challenge statement that we came up with, which I emphasized earlier. We're really looking at the Black home ownership as the area of focus, in particular for this initiative. So by 2041, we're aiming to increase the Black home ownership rate in the region, sufficient to really close the home ownership gap that has been persistent for so long. Just to put in context, the goal here, we have about 3.7 million people in the Puget Sound region, and only 6% of that population is Black or African American identifying households. And our goal to really close that gap would mean that we would have to produce, just back of the napkin calculation, about 60,000 homeowners in that period of time. So that's about 3,000 or so homeowners within that timeline. And we're anticipating that the implementation of this plan by the 3C initiative will get us to a place where we have a sense of the actual numbers of the mortgage-ready folks on the ground and what strategies need to be taken to support each of them in their different phase and journey. Next slide, please. So the plan recognizes that doubling the home ownership rate in the next 2 decades in the Puget Sound region, of course, could be expressed, as Marty was giving an overview earlier, as one of supply and demand. But unfortunately, we want to be sure that we're capturing all the nuances that are essential in terms of a strategy that can address these issues. As such, we have 7 focus areas that are elevated in this 7-point plan, starting off with your marketing and outreach, your pre-purchase or post-purchase counseling, looking at the purchase supports and tools, credit and lending, housing production, as well as policies and practices, and in addition, sustaining existing owners, which is really critical. Each of the focus areas has specific strategic objectives and strategies, and I will go over those just at a high level. You already saw some of these as Marty was going through the decision tree, and we'll be happy to speak more in detail responding to questions. So next slide, please. So you won't be able to see this closely, but these are the strategic objectives and strategies under each focus area. If you have access to the Housing Development Consortium's website, we have the 7-point plan posted there if you would like to follow along and looking in detail what is in the plan. But I will give you an overview in just the next few slides of each of the focus area. So next slide, please. So the first focus area looks at this question of marketing and outreach, which goes back to responding to your side in terms of we have this huge number of potentially mortgage ready folks, but how do we get them to a place where they're in a path and effectively get to a point of becoming homeowners? So the marketing and outreach strategy really aims to overcome many years of discriminatory practices that have been in our systems consistently. It also seeks to address some of the negative experiences that are attached to becoming homeowners for many of our Black households by really creating proactive approaches to marketing. In particular, how do we create a network of trusted brokers and use relationships with community-based organizations, with community leaders to really support people in the process of considering ownership and in the process of getting to a place of becoming homeowners as well. And how do we make sure that the trusted brokers really have tailored outreach tools for the different segments of the populations? We often emphasize that the Black population is not a monolith, and we want to recognize that there are different parts of the population that need specific strategies. So wanting to be intentional in the tools that can be used there to really support the kind of outreach that's necessary for each of the different groups. But we also emphasize implementing affirmative marketing, in particular for products that are income appropriate that we have in our markets. Make sure that people are aware of those programs and services and products that are in the market to really have an opportunity for ownership. And what you see bolded here are the strategies that we believe we will implement in the next year or two. And then what is not bolded are strategies that are more long-term, where we're looking at the state level to update the first-time home buyer definitions, but we're also looking at the Finance Commission home buyer classes that are ongoing, where people sometimes go into those classes and become discouraged. But can we find a way that we're rerouting and giving people a yes and path to ownership? So that's another strategy long-term that folks are looking at really honing in terms of what's implementable. Next slide, please. The second focus area looks at the pre-purchase counseling, which is really looking at ways that we can overcome the many barriers that potential Black buyers have experienced for long. You all know that student loan debt shows up in that debt to income ratio factor, in many cases will become a barrier. So how do we put in place programs that can really triage and support the different buyers in their preparation for becoming ready? It's also looking at some of the one-on-one counseling that's necessary to really develop the critical long-term relationships to support people in their path to ownership. It's also looking at some of the innovative tools like the home buyer clubs that many of our affordable home ownership developers and providers here on the ground continue to use and be able to use those at scale. The second strategic objective emphasizes what Marty was talking about, which is recognizing that home ownership is a process and not an event. And that really emphasizes bringing in the strategy of network building, where we're bringing in different partners to this wider ecosystem of collaboration to support people in their path to ownership. And that also includes bringing in different programs that exist out there that in many cases when people are buying will not be aware of. So having those programs be brought up and serviced for people as they're considering their buying process as well, in case they have debt, having debt remediation programs being there, different credit programs that are out there that can really fully support them. Next slide, please. The second focus area is looking at the purchase supports. This is really strategies that can really create sufficient down payment assistance for people at a scale that's matching the need so far. What we know is that there is often people who qualify because they are low income. There's also people who are in that buffer zone of moderate income and don't have access to down payment assistance programs. We want to be able to increase the amount of down payment assistance, but also expand who's able to qualify for that program to really be more all-encompassing of the different AMIs that we have. We're also looking at ways that there is, of course, the design and implementation of these debt remediation revolving loan funds to be in place to support people to get rid of the debts that they have incurred in their lives that may prevent their opportunity to be able to access ownership. Next slide, please. The fourth one is one that I believe is very relevant to many of you, and you'll be very familiar with some of the strategies. And we've convened financial institutions before where some questions have come up, and I will invite Marty at some point to also speak to some of the strategies and feedback that we've heard in terms of the credit and lending part. But we're emphasizing here, moving forward, innovative strategies in mortgage credit scoring and the practices that exist in place. So you're looking at ways that we're standardizing some of the underlying guidelines and providing uniform income and acquisition limits for increased down payment assistance utilization, because that has remained a challenge. And how do we make sure that we have loan officers who can be context responsive and support the different people in their journey to ownership. It's also increasing training for lending partners to use down payment assistance programs. You will be surprised the number of times that we are aware that the down payment assistance program does not even come up as an option. So can we provide trainings for lending partners to be using these programs in a far much more effective way? And can we also expand the number of community-based lending professionals who are using down payment assistance programs as well? The fourth one is a long-term strategy that we brought up for the CRA officers, which is really using some direct interventions like the special purpose credit programs, given that credit has been one of the challenges why people are denied mortgages. So really having some intentional use of the special purpose programs, given some of the changes we've seen at the federal level, to allow for more innovation in that. Next slide, please. The fifth one is one that really emphasizes that all our efforts around identifying and preparing buyers will be vulnerable if we don't increase at scale the number of homes in our market. So we're looking at a strategy of building the sector capacity to really increase and sustain scaled delivery of homes. That's looking at some of the strategies that Marty touched on around securing resources for pre-development. That's a huge gap here that we have, and we continue to underinvest. So can we increase resources for pre-development? Can we also increase resources for capacity building of the different community-based organizations and the different nonprofit organizations who do some of the income appropriate work? It's also looking at the second strategic objective around land acquisition and identification. We have here in the Puget Sound region, almost $60 billion that's being invested in our transit infrastructure. Can we, at a large scale, begin to acquire land that can be utilized for different affordable housing options, but also ownership opportunities for people near transit stations? It's also looking at some of the land that's available from the faith organizations or religious organizations that we have to utilize that land for the purposes of ownership. And then the long-term strategy there in terms of land acquisition is also expanding some of our existing funding programs, like the land acquisition program at the Housing Finance Commission, and making sure that it has capacity to really help the necessary acquisition there. And then the third strategic objective is really looking at the production that's necessary in terms of the subsidy that we need to produce the different types of homes in our market. And that may be a conversation outside of this group, but it's an important one to emphasize, and it's an important one for you to support as we are advocating in different levels of government. Next slide, please. Now, the sixth one is one that is often a gray area for some, but I want to emphasize its importance. I think John emphasized the systemic challenges that have been persistent, and those come from policies that have historically been in place, and those policies are necessary to be changed. And we have done some extensive work in identifying some of the tools. We also have some that have been moving at the state level. I will not speak to those since we have people from New York in this group, but we'll reference some of the important concepts there, where we're looking at zoning reform, which is really important at the state level, but also at local level, to increase housing choices and move us away from these maps that still look like 1950s of redlining and racial covenants that have really been persistent. And we have most recently had a bill that did not make it through, but we were supporting that bill, and will continue to advance opportunities at the local level for the kind of robust zoning reform that we believe is essential to create home ownership opportunities for the different populations, in particular the Black population. But it's also looking at the other policies that sort of the death by 1,000 cuts regulations that we see existing, the design review processes that take so long for projects and increase costs, the different setback requirements and really making sure that they are supporting the production of income appropriate home ownership opportunities. And then we've also looked at other policies that are really looking at that acquisition of land that I emphasized in high capacity transit station opportunities. And we have a bill that has been moving at the state level around the housing benefit districts legislation. And we have been glad to have the support of the WMBA for that bill. We're still working on a path for the bill to stay alive. At this point, it's looking a little bleak, but we are still working on making sure that it gets some budget support for the bill to still have some kind of level of implementation. Next slide, please. The seventh and final focus area is the sustaining of existing owners. And here we really emphasize that it's one thing to get people in the door to own, it's another to ensure that they really see the results and the equity that comes from that home. I think many of you know that data shows us that many Black households or people of color communities, when they do acquire their homes, in most cases, the equity benefits from that ownership is often disproportionately not as high as white households. And there's quite a number of reasons why, from the owner occupancy repairs that are necessary to support them in increasing and maintaining that equity potential, and also the foreclosure prevention part. That's really important because people may face the threat of foreclosure down the road. So really having programs where we're proactively reaching out to those communities to help them accrue the benefits and be able to maintain their ownership. And with that, that is the last slide in terms of the strategies that we've covered here. But I will pause for questions and invite Marty to close us off with just some thoughts in addition in terms of the 3C work and how you see the implementation of some of the 7-point plan factors.
Thank you, Patience, and I'll be brief so we can possibly some conversation going, but we will be launching this 3C initiative, connecting capital and community next Wednesday. And it's going to focus specifically on implementing this 7-point plan in South Seattle, South King County, and Northern Pierce counties. And we have a team of 8 core team leaders and 24 community leaders that have rallied around this, and our hope is to really work on this policy framework issue as well as the supply and demand issue in that market for the next 3 years and demonstrate how we can make things happen at a significant level. And so plenty of opportunities, but as Patience pointed out, we see this as such a comprehensive issue from front to back, which means that everybody in the ecosystem has to play a role if we're going to be deliberate about being successful.
Wow.
Thank you, Patience, for that great overview, and thank you all for the opportunity.
Wow, thank you so much, Patience. That was fabulous, and thank you so much for your framing and commentary, Marty. Spot on, spot on. We're right at time, but you know, I was hoping for a bit of a conversation, but there's been a lot of action in the chat, and I just want to elevate one comment that really struck me that I think encapsulates kind of most of what we're grappling with here, and it comes from Mike Olden. I think it was a wonderful comment. I just want everyone to be able to reflect on this. Mike says, the greater question is, what are the details behind denial of mortgage applications? Is it lack of down payment? We address this. Poor or limited credit? We address this. Or other factors? We're also seeing a move away from traditional credit for many consumers across all demographics. This can also be the case for immigrant borrowers, right? Can lenders and the secondary market expand acceptance of non-traditional credit to accommodate this trend? That's the holy grail. I mean, that's the kind of pathway we're looking for that can open up minds and balance sheets to this pathway to intergenerational wealth building. That's the dog we all have. That's the jersey we're all teammates to that game. I think we're all maybe wearing different jerseys, but all on the same team. And I want everyone to reflect on what Mike has framed here, because I think that is the kind of Shangri-La of what the game is about. How can we open the doors that are wide and tall, but to more? I'd love just any reflections and comments just on Mike's point there from the panelists. John, Marty, Patience, just we have a couple of minutes.
Yes, one thing that we're doing here, and we're proud of ourselves at New American Funding SI, is that we're probably doing more manual underwrites than any other company out there in the country. That's going to make the difference. Also, our alignment with our CDFI is going to open up more channels and more access to credit. So we're super excited about it. But I think, the guiding shining moment for us is our manual underwriting strategy. We're out there, we're looking at loans, just looking at them and say, hey, if they make sense, let's get it done. That's how we've been able to reach that 12.4% number. We're going to continue to do that going forward.
Let me just ask you this, John, to follow up. Does it matter that your loan officers reviewing those manually are of color themselves? Make that correlation if there is one.
That's from an underwriting perspective. So it really matters that underwriters, of color are looking at these. So, we have a wide, diverse group that we're hiring. So we're looking at hiring people from all ethnicities. And when you have representation side at the table, it makes a difference. It makes a difference because there are nuances that go into every picture. And we really believe that makes a difference. So we want people from all walks of life looking at loans. That's how we're going to be able to lift our communities.
Okay. What do you think, Marty?
Yep. So definitely there's a lot of folks working on the GSE reform side. We need to keep the pressure on from all dimensions there, wherever your associations are and your affiliations. The other thing is we are launching a contract. I need to sign it tomorrow with New Impact, and we're going to try to track the homeownership journey here for low to moderate income Black households for a bit and diagnose those details that Mike points out. What are all those points? What are the reasons why folks aren't trying? Why have they tried in the past and gotten denied? All of those pieces, and map that out fairly clearly. So we're making sure that our time and energy and our interventions are hitting and probably following the line that John's just pushing through by just really being proactive out there.
Fabulous. I've got to say, Patience referenced the 7-point plan. I'm the national co-chair of the Black Homeownership Collaborative, and we're really, the moonshot of an effort is 3 by 30, 3 million net new Black homeowners by 2030. That's what the 7 points are driving towards. The regulatory, statutory, legislative, and market-based initiatives that piece together that get us to that formula. John laid out the math, we've seen that. Unfortunately, some of the down payment assistance components are buried in Build Back Better. So there's a political dimension to this as well. And Patience went through how you guys are kind of having your shoulder into it in Washington State. But again, this is a national problem, not a Black homeowner. This is all of our challenge and solutions as well. So any parting words from anyone on the panel? If not, it was a
yes, Sai, real quick on that note of legislative efforts and to Marty's point as well with the GSEs, a quick plug for the WMBA. As many of you know, we do have a lobbyist on our payroll. So, and essentially one of our main core functions as an association is to ensure that our legislative needs are being met as an industry, that we look at affordable housing, communities that are underserved. So for all of you that took time out of your day today to be a part of this, we appreciate it because each of your companies as a member of the WMBA, you are a voice. And so we are the voice for our industry here in Washington State, but it expands across the nation. And we also have a PAC, as you guys all know, a political action committee. So we love donations, support, volunteer efforts. Go to our website, check with Tanya, myself, any other executive board member. But as you all can appreciate, especially the panelists today, we need boots on the ground. We need Washington and we need legislative assistance. And we need folks that are out there supporting this every day. So that's what we're here for. And we appreciate everybody taking the time to share this really important topic. We are supportive of it. Let us know what we can do ongoing. And we'd love to have you back for future events.
Great. Thanks so much, Jim.
Absolutely. Tanya, thank you for putting this together. Anything else from folks before we wrap it up? Thanks so much, everybody. John, Sai, Marty, Patience, you guys are incredible. Keep up the great work. I love seeing folks on the board. I see Lennox Scott there. Lennox, great seeing you. Mike, of course, amazing feedback. Everybody on the panel and your members today, thank you. Have a great rest of your week. And this was a great way to close out February's Black History Month. So amazing topic, amazing timing. Keep up the good work, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next time.